Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. In honor of International Women's Day, we're having a discussion about gender bias. My name's Shireen Collins. I work for Africa Advocacy Foundation. I am the African Women's Advisor Project Lead. I am a qualified IDVA and I've worked in Vogue services for 10 years now.
Hi, my name's Natalie Johnson and I'm a ASYE social worker in a living care team in London. I did my Masters in Women and Children's Abuse and I worked in the Vogue sector previously.
A specific team that inspects police forces around their safeguarding of children, child protection. So I'm an inspection lead with that. But I also have an organization called Kijiji, co-founded an organization called Kijiji, which is about helping and promoting Black safeguarding professionals, helping them thrive, essentially. And my background predominantly is around gender-based violence policy and gender-based violence strategy.
Hey everyone, my name is Charlene Noel. I am a senior specialist, community specialist actually at the moment, working in Greenwich on a project around women and girls public safety. My background is violence against women and girls. I've been a program and strategy manager for violence against women and girls for the past, I think, 4 years. And I've worked with women and girls throughout my whole career. I'm a qualified midwife and nurse. I've worked in the criminal justice system with women. I am currently doing a PhD on intersectionality and trauma. And that's basically me.
So my name's Aisha. I work with Shireen on a lot of Vogue projects within our charity, Africa Advocacy Foundation to be specific. And I am the project lead on the Zima project. We work with 11 to 25-year-old young women and girls who are either migrants, unaccompanied minors, or young women who have experienced some form of gender-based violence or harmful cultural practice. And we basically work on giving them a platform to share their experiences and providing them with resources that can aid, life as a marginalized woman.
The purpose of today is just to spread knowledge, understanding and awareness when it comes to gender bias and the inequalities that women experience. Myself and Aisha came up with a list of questions that we're going to ask Ade, Charlene and Natalie. So over to you, Aisha, because you've got the first question.
Again, hi everyone. It's lovely to see all of you. The first question is for Ade. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Please correct me if I'm wrong. What does gender bias mean to you?
Thanks, Aisha. Yeah, and yes, you are pronouncing it right. It's Ade, like an additional day of the week. Is how I usually try to help people pronounce it. And there's an A sound at the end. But yeah, that was perfect. Yeah, thanks for the question. Gender bias. So I said earlier, touched on earlier as well, similar to Charlene, I have a background around gender-based violence. Program and strategy. So I don't profess to be an expert at all. And I must say that gender equality and gender bias and gender the impact of gender inequality I learned, as I through my career, so to speak. And I think as a man, that I found that even more helpful because it was something that I found pretty interesting and wanted to share that, So for example, the White Ribbon campaign, which is about, basically men taking a more positive, a more proactive approach to raising awareness around gender-based violence. That's something that I took a keen interest in, and I've always taken a keen interest in. But gender-based violence, I think for me, as a man, it's intentional thoughts or actions that discriminate against women, simply because they are women, So in essence, men and women are not equal, and if they're not seen as equal, they're not seen as equal by men. So this is how I frame it, or this is how I phrase it. It's if and when men don't see women as equal, whether through thoughts or whether through actions, these things can lead to, things like unequal pay. We've seen it lead to unequal access to services, unequal rights. So, we want a society where gender equality is seen, where men and women are having the same or similar opportunities. So I think when we have both sexes able to kind of coexist and able to share whether it's power, influence, or access to basic services, then we can say yes, there isn't that level of gender inequality. But in essence, I think that and just to give you an example, take for the home, for example, the sharing of responsibility for children in the home. When gender bias is a frame by society or people in society, then there's that expectation of what men should and shouldn't do, and then there's that expectation of what women should and shouldn't be doing, and that kind of seeps through everything: media, sports, career, jobs, pay, gym, and the list goes on.
Charlene, why is it important to take gender into account when we talk about violence against women and girls?
Violence against women and girls is disproportionately on women, and 95% of all victims of violence, whether they're women or men, experience violence from a male perpetrator. So even in same-sex relationships, it will often be a male perpetrator that perpetrates, violence. And the experiences of violence are also different for male and female victims. Men experience violence mostly from other men in public spaces, and women experience violence mostly from men they know, usually an ex-partner or intimate partner. And if we wanted to delve deeper into it, we could talk about familial abuse as well. So familial abuse is usually another individual within the family unit where abuse is taking place. And it's usually a male perpetrating it against, like a son perpetrating against their mother. It's very rarely a daughter perpetrating violence against their mother. So if we think about gender bias and violence against women, we know that domestic abuse is disproportionately against women. So, which means that for someone like me, who is a commissioner of services, and even more so in the job that I'm doing now, it's really difficult. I find it really difficult and a bit of a chore to, to get the right funding across the board for women's services, because it's not, although it's recognised that violence against women and girls is against women, government don't like to pay for the services to support women and women only. I'm often asked why we strategize for just women and girls. Despite the evidence base being there, I'm still asked about what do we do for men constantly all the time. So if I write a strategy that is entitled violence against women and girls, I'm always going to receive a question about what we are doing for men. So it just goes to show that despite having evidence base, it accounts for nothing, because there is no gender equality there when it comes to women's services, really. And it's been like that for centuries, and until we know and understand what the characteristics of gender bias, it will never change. So I hope I've answered that question.
And even just to echo with what you said as well, even within my services at IDBA and working in VOG services, I experienced the same thing as you, as being asked those questions as well, around what are we putting in place. I do feel like it's a huge issue, with the government as well as legislation to come into place in terms of how that's managed and how to support more, like you said, about funding. I'm going to ask Ade, is gender equality a concern for men?
Yes. Well, before I answer the question, I was just going to ask you and Charlene a question, and the people who asked about, what services are out there for men? Are they usually men or women or both, or a range?
Usually men.
No.
And I think that, if I'm honest with you, there is definitely, you know, there are definitely men that receive like abuse from a partner. But if we haven't got it right yet with female services, knowing that the evidence points us towards 95% being of, you know, female, then how are we going to start? And also as well, the you know, the intervention for men who experience domestic abuse will be very different to women as well. If we think about things like health promotion campaigns. Say, for instance, I was doing a health promotion campaign on prostate cancer. We know that very few men, especially Black men, come forward to have their prostate checked. So, you know, so the NHS have to use certain initiatives and marketing to get men to come forward to get that done. So if I was doing the same for services where men were being abused, it's a completely different direction that I would have to take in order to get them to come forward. And I feel that we haven't got the women's stuff right yet, because we're still not getting enough funding. So why do I want to start over there? And that can be seen as gender bias in itself. However, the evidence base is there.
And thanks for that. Thanks for that. Yeah, no, and I'm assuming the same for you too, Shireen. And the reason why I asked that is just largely because I suspect, you know, that a lot of men don't know or aren't aware of their biases, or aren't aware of gender bias, essentially.
Sure.
And the ones who are aware a little bit, you know, they probably don't know how to support and support, you know, ways to address that bias. So what you said about, you know, prostate checks, and what you also said about accessing services, you know, I think you have, on the one hand, you have men who aren't aware about gender biases, so they're ill-informed about how, you know, abuse against women is extremely disproportionate, and some of those who maybe are aware are probably just don't know where to start in terms of, you know, supporting gender bias initiatives. Is it a concern for men? To answer the question, you know, if it isn't, you know, it should be, you know, and I don't know how, you know, how well researched that is in terms of whether men are concerned about, you know, gender equality and gender bias. I think that, you know, there's a lot more discussion about it, but at the same time, you know, I think that it boils down to just a lack of awareness, really. At the same time, you know, societal norms and, you know, the conceptions of masculinity and expectations as well, and, you know, some men feel like they are, as men, expected to lead all the time. A lot of that shapes their behaviors and stuff. You know, they might think that some of these services should only go, you know, women. It goes to women because women need it. Men don't need it. You know, I do think that they probably similar to racism and prejudice and discrimination. And I'm trying not to deviate too much into that, or venture too much into that. But similar to that, I think a lot of men probably are thinking, oh, there isn't much of an equality problem, because, hey, look, you're in a position. So, you know, I'm sure it's not as big of a deal as you make out to seem. Again, you know, my statement isn't backed up by research. But at the same time, you know, I think that I feel that a lot of this stems from, you know, how men behave and how men act. So if men were, you know, a lot more fairer, or putting in place fair strategies and measures, I think that, you know, that we will be seeing a greater understanding of gender bias. In the same way as well, if men understood this, you know, other men, men's behavior is leading to the abuse of women, I think that they would also be able to do something about it. Since Sarah Everard's murder, just over a year ago, I saw a headline, a worrying statistic, but it is not surprising. And I'm sure you all are familiar with that as well. 125 women have been killed by men since Sarah Everard's murder a year ago. And that's just astounding. So, I think in the same way that we want to, empower each other, is in the same way I think that, men need to be promoting gender equality. And the only way you could be doing that, one of the ways to be doing that, is promoting the empowerment of women, and trying to understand that there is a power imbalance, and seeking to address or redress that power imbalance as well. But when you think about, or when you visualize executive tables, you see a lot of men at their boardroom tables. They're not thinking, a lot of times they're not thinking about gender inequality, because they're speaking to like-minded people in the room. So yeah, if it's not a concern for men, it should be.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about what Ade was saying in terms of men not, certain men who don't know and don't understand, but actually that's because I feel like they choose not to, because like what you just said about like-minded people around the table, they're not particularly concerned because it doesn't concern them. That's how they see it, I think, a lot of the time. Because even if we look at the people who have joined today, aside from you, Ade, where are the men? This is about education, this is about awareness and discussions, but actually a lot of the time they're absent from those conversations. So I think, that's the first barrier, just even getting men to join in and have these conversations. I remember when I was studying to be a social worker, and there was 28 of us, there were 5 men on the course. And I remember saying, oh, I'm a feminist. And like one of the men, he was laughing. And I said, oh, why is that funny? And he was like, oh yeah, like that's for women. And I was saying, no, actually, as a man, you can be a feminist. Oh no, I don't know about those things. And I'm like, okay, you don't know, but you can learn. But he didn't even want to have that conversation. So right there, it was a shutdown. So if they're not even willing to engage, and it's some men, it's not all men, you're here and waving the flag for the men, and we appreciate that. But I think, there needs to be a bigger male presence in these kind of discussions for it to really be meaningful.
And actually, thanks for that, Natalie. When I was working in Domestic Violence Commission and VAW commissioning as well, I did get a lot. I did get a lot of questions around, how I'm working in that environment. And whenever I said I was, a feminist, people, mostly men, would wonder how a man can be a feminist as well. And you're absolutely right, because a lot of it was, I recognized that another man is a bit more knowledgeable about this subject, but me over here, the first question is, oh, why are you doing that? And then when you explain or try to explain, a lot of men are, well, I don't know about it. This isn't something that I'm, that's my cup or my bag, or don't really know much about. So yeah, you're right, and it's a space that I think men, you have to kind of pull them kicking and screaming before they land into these types of discussions. But you just gotta keep striving, unfortunately.
Just to add on to the tail end of that, I think it's just so significant for men to understand, because as I said in the chat, our leads, if you look at the government, for example, a large majority of them are, cis, het, white majority, like they're men. And so if we don't get men to understand our perspectives as femme identifying women, how also supposed to make progress in terms of legislation and things like that. It takes significant and public moments of trauma. For somebody mentioned Sarah Reid and Sarah Everard. It took that for a lot of momentum to be, you know, pressured for the men who are in power to make a change, and even that is not enough. And so until men start taking accountability and recognizing the issues that women face as you know, unequal, I don't think we can make much change until we focus on that element of gender equality. Sorry for that long span. It just really hit home. And somebody said that that the MPs that are Black women are receiving the highest rate of abuse and trolling, which is very true. Like Diane Abbott was like abused on the train when she just did one that always like villainified. I think that's the word. I'm not too sure. But I'll move on to the next question that is for Natalie. How does discrimination and racism take form in gender bias?
Yeah. So obviously when we're talking about gender bias, that alone can create like prejudice and discrimination. I think I'm always a bit like, what's the difference between prejudice and discrimination? And I actually looked this up earlier, and it was saying that prejudice is the feeling, but discriminations are the actions. So they're the things that actually stop people from doing things. So I think in terms of like racism and discrimination and gender bias, when we think about like intersectionality as a Black woman, you know, that already, I remember one time I was at uni and I was doing my undergrad, and obviously I'm Black, but I'd never really looked at myself as a Black woman. And the lecturer in front of the whole class said to me, you know, how does it feel to be a Black woman knowing you're at the bottom of the system, you know, the structure of the hierarchy of people? And I was just like, what? And he was like, you know, not only are you Black, but you're a woman. You know, how's that made your life difficult? And I'd never even really thought, you know, oh, maybe this hasn't happened to me because I'm Black or because I'm a woman. And I think after he said that, it just really opened my eyes to how the world sees me, kind of like, and it's just having those stereotypes of, you know, like being a strong Black woman and, you know, as a Black woman, wanting to protect our Black men, and just all these different things that come into play in, you know, never mind if you have a disability or any other of the characteristics that, you know, people discriminate against. I think it's just hurdle after hurdle. I think when we're thinking about gender bias, that's one struggle that's universal. So that's men and women. Then when you're adding in the next layer of being a Black woman, that's just adds like extra hurdles that we then have to overcome. And it's like, obviously after the Black Lives Matter movement, everybody wants to be an ally of, you know, Black people, and that's wonderful. And I think a lot of it's tick box, you know, in a lot of workplaces, it's, oh, we need to do this now to show that we're inclusive, to show that we're diverse, to show that, you know, it's equal. But actually a lot of work still needs to be done, because a lot of things are still unequal. You know, the gender pay gap's still a thing. That's not, you know, there's facts, there's things there, hard evidence showing us that actually things still aren't equal in society. And I think just as a Black woman, you know, trying to overcome all these things, you know, my workplace, I think it's great, it's inclusive, it's diverse, but just in the biggest structure of things, as the higher up you go, the Black faces seem to be less and less. And that's just something I've noticed in many different, you know, organizations that I've worked in. At the top, it always tends to be white, maybe a woman, which is always great, but it's not a face that looks like mine.
Yeah, no, it's true. And even when we think about like when you're saying about the higher up you go, it's like the less and less people that you see that, you know, who are similar to you or from the same cultural background. So that's the thing as well. Just even in terms of when we think about, you know, women from marginalized communities and about all of the issues that they face in terms of, I know Charlene spoke about intersectionality earlier, but even when you think about in terms of that and about the extra barriers, obviously at Africa Advocacy Foundation, we're like a cultural specific, although we have a no one turn away policy, we're a cultural specific organisation that understands the extra barriers and the extra vulnerabilities that women from marginalised communities and Black women face and experience.
That's why I chose to write about intersectionality, partly because it was something that I learned as a fluke. Actually, I was on some training and they were talking about it, and I think that I connected with it so much because especially working in my field, most of the women that I'm working with are white middle class women, so they don't understand me, and they don't understand the communities in which they work in. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this PhD was to kind of create some form of algorithm that can be given to professionals so they can identify intersectionality, so that the care that they give is less traumatizing, because the different intersectional values are not taken into account when they're on in the field and working. It means that they're causing more trauma to the situation, because not only are clients trying to seek support, but they want support that is indicative to them. And without professionals knowing and understanding what those intersectional values are, they're just receiving the same response all the time. And I think I'm doing a lot of research with social workers, actually, and GPs, because they're frontline services that work with families in that very kind of intimate way. And it's been shocking, actually, that the amount that don't take intersectional values into account. And that is, unconscious bias as well as, gender bias. So yeah, I will go off on a tangent because I love doing my PhD sometimes. So so I could talk about this all day, but it is definitely a thing, and yeah, it's very much a thing.
And actually, I was telling Shireen earlier that I was looking on Ade's, I think it's the Kijiji Instagram, and he did a live with Janine Davis, who talks about like the adultification of Black girls. And I think, especially in social work, I work with 16 plus. So, I noticed that when we're talking about young Black girls, they were always talking about the language used. They're not looking at them as victims of child sexual abuse. They're looking at them as if they're older. And then, the victim blaming comes in. I was at a panel once, an exploitation panel, and one of the young girls, she was 16, and she was being exploited, but she was bringing along a friend. And, somebody said, oh yeah, she's grooming other young people. And the manager of the chair of the panel said, actually, she's bringing a friend for her safety. She's bringing a friend because she's in a situation where she doesn't feel safe. And we really need to be mindful of the language we use when we're talking about young people. And I think even in terms of racism, because I feel like I've just gone only on about women, I work with a lot of my young Black boys that I work with are in the criminal justice system. We know Black boys are 6 times more likely to be stopped. And it's all these stereotypes that for young people, that's how they see themselves as well. So trying to break these cycles is difficult when actually that's what they see themselves as, how they're being portrayed in the media, how people are labeling them anyway. So it's like that self-fulfilling prophecy. Actually, if this is what they're going to think of me, I'm just going to do that anyway. So it's just so much work that still needs to be done.
Thanks for watching that, Natalie. That was lovely to hear that you saw that. So that's really good. But yeah, adultification is something that Janine Davis has researched about, and she's also doing a PhD, and a lot of her work and research is around Black children. And adultification is something I think a lot of us as professionals, we've seen all too often. Police adultify young Black boys all the time, and even the local authority systems and child protection systems aren't the best with young Black girls either. But yeah, if anyone hasn't seen it, have a look.
What has been your own personal experience of gender bias?
It's funny because I remember when you showed me this, I was thinking, I can't think of anything. And I was having a discussion earlier, and I was saying, actually, I can't think of a specific incident. It's more just been like a concept that's been there like my whole life as a Black woman. Just as a child, I remember like really small things, like as a girl being picked last for the sports teams when you're playing football in the playground. Just I was saying, like, even my mum painting my room pink. I don't even think she asked me, and it was just, I'm a girl, this is kind of how it is. And that's kind of just followed me my whole way. And then I actually did remember something that I remember. It was just when we first came out of lockdown, and I'd gone out for a couple of drinks, and it was in Liverpool Street, and I live in North London, and I decided to walk home. And it was about 10:30 at night. I'd had a couple of drinks, and I really got stick for walking home and not keeping myself safe. And I was like, actually, why is it my responsibility as a woman to keep myself safe? I'm walking on the main roads, you know, there's street lights, but the onus is still on us as women rather than the predatory men. You know, even I was on the phone walking, and whilst I was on the phone walking, a man came up to me and like kissed me on my face. And it was just like, I got the stick for that because I made the mistake of walking home. And, you know, it's always about victim blaming. And we know this is why a lot of Black women don't go forward when they've been raped, because in the criminal justice system, you know, it's about breaking down this woman's character. Oh, is she promiscuous? Oh, does she like to drink? Oh, what kind of clothes does she wear? And it's just always the same. You know, it comes back to being our responsibility to be safe in the community, even with, you know, the incidents that have happened in the last couple of years, the high profile cases. It's about, oh, she walked through the park, or oh, she should have taken this route, oh, she didn't tell anybody where she was. Why as women do we always have to safety plan just to go? Even I remember me and Shireen was talking about going to the gym early in the morning. Oh, you know, it's starting to get a bit lighter now in the morning, so we'll be able to go that bit earlier than maybe we would. But it's just a constant thing that's, you know, put out that women, how we should keep ourselves safe, and not actually thinking about the men who are committing the crimes, the men who are preying on the vulnerabilities of the women.
It's true, because at the end of the day, we do live in a world where there is a lot of victim blaming. Like you said about why did her friend leave? Why was she walking on her own late at night? Why didn't she get a taxi? When actually the responsibility and onus is on those men that commit those crimes.
When you mentioned about like breaking down the character of a woman whenever they come forward with an experience such as rape, I remember there was like a trial, can't remember how long ago it was, but I think the defense used her underwear and her choice of underwear, saying, oh, she intended to have intercourse with this man because she chose a really nice underwear. And it's just like, what on earth is that? Like, why is that even acceptable? To like break down a woman's character when the evidence suggests that she did not give consent. It's really that simple. And I think the lines are blurred intentionally when really it's straightforward. If it's a no, it's a no. And I don't think it's fair for people to go through that point blank and period. Yeah.
I was going to just add as well, you know, when I was working in Gender-Based Violence Commission, I'm working with IDVAs as well, you know, who are like social workers, unsung heroes really in terms of the work IDVAs and social workers do. But just the concept of creating a safety plan, you know, always used to, you know, stress me, because it's, you know, you're working with your colleagues and, you know, whether it's a domestic violence MARC or you're working with IDVAs, and IDVAs, their job is to create a safety plan. And when you actually break it down and think about it, you're helping a woman, you know, prepare to flee a situation and to anticipate a situation where she only has, you know, minutes, hours to leave and go somewhere she's never been before, you know. And I just always used to think, well, that's just, you know, the amount of women, you know, you all would know that refugees are, there's just no space. So that means, you know, it's filled up by women who are fleeing men, you know, and you're just having to, you know, make sure you have these keys and make sure you have your ID ready, and, you know, and when you're fleeing, the services that we have doesn't help them make life easier. So the onus again is on victims who are fleeing to keep themselves safer. So it's you know, we have a long way to go, and I think that I don't feel we speak enough about who we need to talk to, and that's men. You know, I think we talk about it, but we don't really direct the conversation. When I say we, it's just about society. We don't really direct the conversation to men to say, hey, you know, you do know that when women die, when women are killed or assaulted, it's not just, you know, they're just dying. It's because, you know, somebody's doing it, and that somebody is usually men. So yeah, but I'm forever an optimist. We'll get there. Maybe we can share this Zoom with like men, pretty much.
I know it's, again, just to add on to the tail on of that, I just think it's important to mention that when we do this, not we, but when society does this thing of victim blaming, especially when it comes to, oh, being out late at night, and oh, you made yourself susceptible to it. I think nobody really brings attention to homeless women and the vulnerable women that are already out there, and don't have any protective measures, and don't have a choice but to be out on the streets. How can we victim blame them? Like, I think it's, when I bring that up, people are usually dumbfounded, because no, you didn't think about that when you thought the victim was the one to blame. And so I just thought that was a important bit to mention when we're talking about victim blaming, because that automatically suggests that as a woman, you can get attacked or sexually assaulted, whether you're wearing a short dress or whether you're wearing a niqab, the full Muslim dress. There's no victim blaming that comes into this conversation at all, and I think it's quite frankly ridiculous when victim blaming is used as a matter to justify what a man has done or perpetrated. It's absolutely ridiculous. Sorry, it gets to my, this conversation really, like, it gets to my heart, and that's why I'm just derailing. But I think my next question is for Ade, and the question is, I think it closely relates into what we are discussing, is who has the power to change instances of gender bias?
Well, I don't want to give that power to men or just men. I think that men and women, have been trying to change gender bias for a long time now. I remember years ago, I signed up to a United Nations initiative called He for She. And He for She, basically, it's, men for women, essentially. But they planned a closed session, male-only closed session, to kind of talk about gender bias and what men can do. It's a good idea. I mean, they did receive some criticisms about, men taking up those spaces, but I did think that was a good start, because men tend to listen to each other, especially when it's conversations or topics that they don't want to talk about. They tend to listen to each other around that. But nevertheless, I think, we all do. Men can take a nurturing role. Women can lead. I hail from a family of, my mother has 6 sisters. So I grew up always seeing women as leaders, women doing things, women taking on, one of my mom's sisters is a diplomat. So I've always kind of just seen them as, empowering and just defiant, but also leaders as well as nurturers. So I haven't really, it's only when you get older that you see that, society is a bit warped. Yeah, so I think that, power to change gender bias, yeah, I think we all do. And when men are in positions of power and influence, and there was a mention in the chat about men holding government positions, whether it's ministers or those in civil service, I think that should come with an understanding where, they're inviting or having that dialogue with women. And I'll pick the police as an example. The police is now looking to have a Vogue action plan, right? And the National Police Chiefs Council is looking to have, or will have, a Vogue action plan. And that action plan is around twofold, around how police services up and down the country are responding to and managing Vogue, and also, secondly, how within police services themselves, how police officers, in terms of accountability, and I think, loosely, reading between the lines, that is about how men within police are addressing, gender imbalance. So I think that, yes, when you are in positions of power and influence, you know, that's always a good start, but also education, really, conversations. I hope, you know, I have those conversations within my spaces, but it needs to go beyond that. And I think we just need to constantly have those conversations amongst each other, whether it's men, all men, or men with women as well.
How I think it's ideal for family members and friends to promote this idea of gender equality, and have conversations surrounding it, and hold men accountable before they get to positions of power, and have that implemented in the education system and things like that, because I think it's necessary. It's hard to undo once you have people that get to those instances of power.
What Ade was saying about, you know, the police and their new Vogue strategy that they're writing up with the police. So I was asked to be part of the consultation for what they're trying to do, and I think that in the police there are enough people to consult with from all different walks of life, and I feel that, you know, obviously in the police it's mostly men, and I think the conversation should be had with those men as to how they feel about Vogue and what they do around Vogue before coming out and consulting with the experts. Because I never would say that I am an expert, because I think that life is about lifelong learning. But what I would say is you're coming to the people that commission the services all the time, instead of, you know, creating systemic change and cultural change within, you know, that particular service. So I think that they should look, you know, it's almost like, you know, cleaning up your own house before trying to clean up other people's. I think that they need to be looking at what they have in-house and what knowledge and expertise they have in-house before coming outside of that. But that's just my bugbear about the Metropolitan Police, basically. So I'll stop now, I'll come off my soapbox. But yeah, but I think that what they're doing is great, but they're just going about it in the wrong way. They need to consult in a different way.
So my question to you, Charlene, is about, and obviously everyone else can add to it after as what Charlene's finished, is about how does culture, upbringing, have an impact on gender stereotypes and family dynamics take into account when we talk about gender bias?
Me that question.
I'm asking you that question.
Did I say that I was going to answer that question?
You did say you were going to answer that question.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Everyone can join in, because we've all got something to add. I've got something to add, so we can all be a part of like the discussion. It's fine.
This is something that I think that you and I discussed a lot, Shireen.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because Shireen and I have children who are the same age, and she has a female and I have a male, right? And I am a feminist in all senses of the word, and I'm so unapologetically a Black woman as well. Now, and my son has grown up in that, but he is such an alpha male in all senses of the word, and he often challenges me a lot, because I just don't understand how you can be that alpha, like, you know, having gone on walks with me and marches with me, and you know, I remember having to do presentations around FGM and presenting it to him, so he knew what FGM was before all of his friends at school, you know, just things. So cultural aspects around gender bias are huge. Let's face it. You know, I'm from, you know, West Indian heritage, and women are, you know, at the bottom of the food chain at some point. I remember my father being served his dinner first in huge proportions, and the women have to sit down at the table and wait patiently. You know, like there's just the hierarchy for men and women, especially in the Black community, is huge, and we can't hide away from that. And I think it's about, you know, we have to have these open and honest conversations to change the narrative, because if we don't, it's just going to get from bad to worse. And now also as well with young people, because I'm a bit of a dinosaur and very fossiled now, so when I look at young people and social media and how hypersexualization is so huge, especially in youth culture. It's crazy, you know, to be seen as someone who is, you know, all that. You have to wear like no clothes, have a Brazilian butt lift, and have the biggest boobs known to mankind to be. Do you know, it's just madness. So yes, culturally it plays a big part in it. Youth culture is huge. It's crazy. I think that social media is almost, it's very much a help, but it can also be a hindrance. You know, I think that if it wasn't for social media, a lot of the conversations that we're having right now wouldn't be being had. But then also on the flip side of it, you have all the things that we don't want to see when it comes to women inequality as well. So yeah, gosh, this is huge, because I always talk about, I remember being a young person and the kind of music I used to listen to and be accepted of and accept and dance around to. Now when I listen to that music, the way that I grimace and how disgusted I feel. So many things without even thinking about it. And that is just, that attributes to gender inequality in the biggest way. We don't even realize it because we've normalized it. Like, you know, it's, yeah, I'm going off on a tangent because it's just so huge. And I think culture plays a huge part into gender bias and inequality of women. For young people in Greenwich, as part of a plan that I've put together, and I wanted to start from young people. And the reason why I wanted to start from young people is because I feel that I'll be able to see the benefit of my work through working with young people to see change in the future into the role. They didn't know what to do with boys, so they knew that they wanted to educate boys around misogyny and sexual violence. But it's almost like what they did is they left the girls out of the conversation and they just wanted to work merely with the boys. And I was like, this is absolute foolishness. Like, literally, the boys need to know what the girls are saying, and the girls need to know behavior, have, like, you know, get any kind of behavioral change within, you know, that particular school. So that's what we started. We started these discussions and workshops with young people, and it's very interesting indeed. And I don't know how they thought that they were gonna literally segregate the boys from the girls and have conversations about misogyny and sexual violence without the girls actually, you know, having a say at all when they're the ones affected. So it's almost, I don't know, it's weird. So they thought they were doing something great, but in actual fact, it was crap. And I told them that, so now it's changed and now they're doing it differently. But I just think that people don't know, like, you know, the actual professionals don't know how to work on it either. So there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think also it's about being comfortable to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And being open to having those conversations.
Yeah.
And like, especially like with young people, it's like there's no right or wrong way, because there's room for learning, you know, and that's the whole purpose of doing these programs or doing these workshops, you know. But yeah,
Natalie said that she has a 17-year-old as well. Like, Natalie feels my pain, and so, and she's, you know, and his identity is shaped around his peers, the area and media, 100%.
I literally, when you said youth culture, I literally just typed youth culture, because I was like, I'm always like, your mum is like a feminist. I always drill into him about consent, and, you know, we had this whole thing where he was in a WhatsApp group and like girls' pictures were getting sent around and they were like rating girls, and I was like, well, put my picture in. If you want to rate women, rate your mum. Do you know what I mean? I was just like always having conversations with him about, you know, just the pressures of what it is to be a young boy, but also what it is to be a young girl, and actually how you need to coexist in the same space. And I think even now, when I was just listening to you, it just made me think of, actually, I can't remember what it, for my master's, I did a dissertation, and it was I can't even remember what it was. I was just like, oh my gosh. But I remember I did focus groups with girls and boys, and they were in year 5. So they were like 9 and 10. And it was about image and the different things that came out of those focus groups. So the boys, you know, they were talking about their PlayStations and all this, you know, the football, and the conversation wasn't even what it was meant to be. But the girls had brought up things about sexual harassment. And these were like 9 and 10-year-old girls. And already at such a young age, they were already aware of, you know, oh, when I'm on the bus, I'd like to sit close to my mum because I want to feel safe. And they already had this concept of needing to be safe. And they were so young at the time. I remember being really surprised coming out of that focus group of actually, I think partly because of social media and, you know, they're being exposed to so much from so young. A lot of, you know, I think you have to be like 13 to use social media, but a lot of these young people under 13 go on their parents' accounts or have accounts that their parents, you know, supervise, or YouTube. Just the fact that they're accessing, you know, my 5-year-old niece was talking about periods the other week, and my mum was like, you know, what do you know? Oh, I saw it on YouTube, or oh, I saw it on TikTok. And it's just like the kids are just exposed to so much. I think youth culture, how we looked at it before, it's even younger now. Like the children are accessing so much so young that they just seem so much more grown up because everybody has a device. You know, my 6-year-old niece has a better iPhone than I do. So it's just, as much as you can try to police what they're doing and monitor everything, there's always messages coming through that even the things that these young children watch now, I think like, oh, that's so grown up for you to be, you know, my 5-year-olds don't watch Peppa Pig. And I'm like, no, when Riley was little, he was watching Thomas the Tank Engine till he was about 8. 8-year-old wouldn't watch that now. So yeah, the shift in culture as well. It's just crazy. The access so much.
Who I know is a teacher said it's really common for schools to separate genders and deliver specific topics. It's about the sensitivity of it. And I totally agree that there are certain subject areas that need to have the sensitivity around it. However, I think that when you're talking about sexual violence and misogynistic behaviour, I feel that boys need to hear from the girls, because it's almost like I'm talking at them opposed to getting them involved for them to understand. And I think that I feel that like the discussions that I've heard being had in schools and disclosures being made, actually, some of the boys don't even realise that it's wrong. Like literally, like, you know, some of the things that they're saying are wrong. And I think unless those discussions are open and frank, I don't know how we're expected to change that narrative. Well, there wasn't like sexual harassment per se. It was just that, you know, I think there was a report done by is it Ofsted and somebody else?
Yeah, I'm just Googling it now.
Yeah,
to paste it in the chat.
Yeah, where it was about sexual harassment and in colleges and schools, and it really did. It brought up a lot of different things, and one of the things was actually having girls and boys talk about it at the same time. Yeah, because there was they noticed that like Shana identified, that the boys don't actually get it. They don't know what's going on, and they need to have those open and frank conversations. And I think that it does need to be done in stages, but I also think that it needs to be done from grassroots, from year 7. Start having those small conversations and planting those seeds so they grow with it instead of having to grow into it. Do you know what I mean? I think it needs to be part of the school curriculum, and I know that the Department of Education are trying to cement that into the curriculum going forward, which is great, which has all come out of that report really as well.
I wanted to say, because you guys mentioned like youth culture, and we were having discussion with our beneficiaries, literally I think it was last Saturday. We were talking about gender bias and the role it plays within the home, and I know we're specifically talking about Vogue, but it goes both ways. Like with men and women, you have this provider narrative that damages perception of the self in men, and then you have young women who are traumatized of having to be the caregivers in like a multi-sibling home and then are, you know, turned away from having children as they grow up. I know me personally, I grew up with 3 brothers, 2 of them being younger, 1 of them being older, but yeah, I was given the responsibility as a caregiver, especially in a single parent home. And I just think that people undermine the significance of what culture does and the bias that comes with it, and how it affects how people implement and coordinate themselves throughout life, whether it be in the workforce, whether it be in school, whether it be in relationships, because the submissive kind of, I do submissive in quotation marks, the submissive narrative that is placed on women is very damaging, because it can lead to relationships where the power's imbalanced, and that can therefore lead to, you know, domestically abusive situations. And I just wanted to mention that.
The Ofsted review is really fascinating report, but probably not surprising. But I think the culture, boys just don't know. They really don't know. Social media doesn't help. The internet doesn't help. Even as an adult myself, I struggle with the just the internet and social media and the volume of stuff. Whereas for young boys, for young people, that's just normal. And to kind of recap as well, I remember when I was younger, sometimes I used to think, oh, I'm not old enough to access that content. This is where I used to think when I was younger. But I used to think, oh, I'm only 13. I'm not old enough to access that content. Or should I be knowing this? You know, and even maybe you get to 16 and you're thinking the same. But, you know, now it just doesn't matter. All that's out the window. So all of us are struggling to manage our kids, but also manage our parents as well, because we're talking about gender bias. For them, that's the norm. So there's no point even trying to address it with the parents. That's their reality. I think with the kids, that's what we need to try and shape that. But yeah, curriculum, we've all mentioned it. But for me, that's where it's at, really. Just talk to the kids when we can.
Why do you think gender bias still occurs today? So that's for everybody. Lots of talking about it, so I feel like a lot of it overlaps. But just to be more specific,
it's still relevant today because it's still happening. I in my previous job, before I switched to the civil service, I was in the local authority, and a lot of my background was in the local authority, and they did on the back of George Floyd, as a lot of organizations did. They looked at racial inequality, but at the same time, they had started looking at gender inequality. They'd done a gender inequality review and stuff. So some interesting stuff came out of that. But I do think that, but that was 2021, or 2020. But for me, I was kind of like, well, 2020, and you're doing a gender bias review. Gender equality pay gap is what it was called, specifically looking at why and how women were paid less than men. So the roots for me will always be, and I've said throughout this talk, is men, really. And I think that we, until more men have conversation, until more men hold each other account, and until more men start talking about it and trying to do something about it, then we will continue to have these kind of conversations, which are meaningful, which are helpful. But it's really going to take men to initiate, drive, and in some instances lead as well. So yeah, that's how we need to do that, and that's why it's still relevant, because we haven't made enough progress on it, but we will.
I wanted to say that I think one reason why gender bias still occurs is because there's still this, and I'm in love with the word narrative. I've said it about 10 times, but this narrative of entitlement within men themselves. And I think entitlement is what a lot of things can boil down to. And entitlement is inevitably something that is not explicitly taught, but not necessarily rectified. Patriarchy. Exactly that. And I think it's not just in one element of society, we're literally surrounded by it. And so it's very hard to identify, okay, what exactly do we start with? Because I think, especially in the work that we do, me specifically, I'm dealing with individuals that have gone through experiences already and are dealing with the repercussions of entitlement. And so tracing, okay, where do we stop this from happening is hard, because you'll go back to like you'll go down to like, okay, the instance like sexual assault, but then you go under that and there's another layer of patriarchy and another layer of patriarchy and then another layer of patriarchy, and then it just feels very cyclical. So yeah, I don't even know, but I think this element of entitlement and patriarchy is where gender bias stems from, and unpacking that means unpacking every system that has been implemented as a result of it.
You know what Charlene was saying before about the conversation is not starting young enough. So obviously these stereotypes, the way society is, it's so ingrained in all of us, even unconsciously. There's so many things and traditional values and the different cultures. So I know Addie said we will get there, but I'm like, when and how? Because actually it's a really long journey. It's ongoing, it's education, it's challenging, it's everything. Because like obviously I work with 16 plus, and the views that they have are things, they're not new. The things that young people are saying aren't new. Even like in terms of drill music, and the outrage that so many people have towards drill music. But like what Charlene was saying before, when we were younger, we were listening to bashment songs that, the things are not changed. The things are still the same. It's still misogyny. It's still, objectifying women. It's still all these things. And those messages, I don't see how they will change.